Elena Diaz said, why are U.S. citizens always willing to follow their crazy leaders and always prepared to make enemies out of any of us in the world? Well, I don't know if this was a rhetorical question. I don't think it was. But Brian, what's your take on this?
It goes back to the media. The information space of any given nation is feeding the collective mind of those people. Just like when you eat food, you're feeding your body. And if you're eating a good diet, you're going to be strong and healthy, resilient and constructive, productive every day. And if you're eating poison, you're going to be sick all the time. You're not going to be very productive. And if you're doing drugs and your state of reality, your grasp on reality is being altered, that you may hurt yourself or others. And it's the same in terms of information space. It is possible to poison an entire population by drumming lies into their head every single day. We see it. We see it manifesting itself all across the West, with the U.S. proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, with this growing conflict the U.S. is provoking with China. We can see it. We can see how dangerous it is. And if we war game this out to its final conclusion, how deadly this could possibly be. Look at what happened with Iraq. Look at what happened with Afghanistan, Syria, Libya. There's real world consequences for these lies. So why are U.S. citizens following their leaders? It comes down to education and media, which unfortunately the government has more or less a monopoly on. The government and the interests that drive what they do. And so this is why American people go along with it. It's not that American people are fundamentally or inherently bad. They're not. There's so much potential being wasted in the United States because of the small handful of people in Washington and on Wall Street right now.
Indeed. And there's also, I think that there are layers to it. There are people who live in the United States who are indeed very enthusiastic about what their government does abroad. That we can't avoid that reality. However, there's also just many more who, because of the noise and because of just the divisions and also just life in the United States, is quite difficult for most people. I mean, if 80% of people live paycheck to paycheck, you have a society where most people are generally not thinking about the United States' role in the world. And so that then leaves this tiny minority. I believe it's a minority, and it's the people who are polled who actually have these strong negative opinions. But most people are either just misinformed, misdirected, or just pick, it's kind of like when you go into the SATs and you don't study, you're kind of just picking what's in front of you, and I think that's kind of how it is. That's kind of how it feels like in the United States, at least.
Danny, they always say you should, if it's multiple choice, always pick C, because there's like some sort of statistical probability that it will be more right than any other letter. And for Americans, it seems like they always pick sanctions and war against other countries. That's their go-to. If they don't know the answer, war.
Right. All right. And unfortunately, also, unlike the SATs where there might be other options, it's not just B, C, there's an A and a D. However, on this test, the other options are actually scribbled out. There's no coverage of it. It's like, independent media, people who are doing work for peace, whether it's activism or otherwise, they tend to not have the platforms and the megaphones large enough to reach lots and lots of people, and that is by design. There's one other question, Brian, here. Where is it? Okay, so we have. Let me hide this one. Where? Oh, here we go. Elena Diaz again. So 2 questions from Elena. Hasn't it been a mistake that Russia hasn't targeted NATO command centers from the beginning as a deterrent? What's your take on this? I believe they're talking about Ukraine here.
You have to think about the different perspectives and the different groups of people involved in this conflict, from the public in Russia, the public in Europe, the public in the United States, the political spheres of each of these regions, economics, military. Everything has to be considered together. If you started by attacking NATO centers in Europe, that would be a declaration of war. And in the eyes of the world, the entire world would say, why did Russia do that? They didn't need to do that. Even though, okay, you could say that it's justified. They're obviously the ones directing the conflict. But this is what Russia is so good at, escalation management. They are able to manage it, and they're able to they have a dominance over the escalation. They want to keep as many options open as possible for leverage over the worst impulses that NATO has, their idea of going into Ukraine. If they already started doing that and NATO already countered it, and that was already going on, that's one less card Russia would have to throw on the table and say, if you go into Ukraine with your warplanes, this is what we're going to do to your facilities across NATO. So we have to think about it long term. We have to think about it. It's like chess. Sometimes the obvious move is not the best move. Sometimes that is the worst move to make. It's a trap.
Yeah, indeed. And that's all for the questions from Super Chats. However, let me just hide this one. I wanted to ask you something because I get it all the time. There's this suggestion from those who disagree with our viewpoints, and usually it's in incredibly bad faith, but oftentimes we don't respond to the question. I'm wondering what your response is, given that you live in Thailand. Oftentimes when we talk about Russia and China and developments geopolitically in the way that we do, we get the, why don't you just move to those countries a response, and I'm wondering what your take on that would be, given that you did move to Thailand, and given that it is this incredibly bad faith response, but I'm curious about how you would respond to it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, my response is I did leave the West. I don't live in the West, and I don't regret that. I mean, there are times where I just think, looking at what's going on there, and it's tragic. It really is. I can't even imagine what my life would be like if I was still there in the West. I see people in the comment section, is Thailand Western? It is not Western. Thailand has this bad reputation from the Vietnam War and it's not as if they had a choice. They hosted U.S. troops, or else they were going to be the next nation bombed into oblivion. Since then, so much has changed. Almost right after the Vietnam War ended and U.S. troops left the region, Thailand immediately repaired its ties with Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and also China. And now, this very day, China is Thailand's largest trade partner, investor, source of tourism. More tourists come from China than all other Western countries combined. They're building infrastructure together, including a high-speed rail link that will connect Thailand to China. And this is the reason why right now the United States is actually meddling heavily in Thai politics to reverse the close and growing relationship Thailand has with China. So I'm here in Southeast Asia. I can see with my own two eyes, I've been here almost 20 years. I can see with my own two eyes what the West has given, or I should say taken from the region, and what China has given to the region. You can see the difference. It's night and day. You could see the United States meddling in absolutely everything, poisoning absolutely everything, and China just coming and doing business and minding their own business, not sticking their nose in Thailand's political affairs. And think about it. Think about from an ideological point of view. A lot of people like to look at the world's through ideological lenses. China is supposed to be a communist country. Thailand is a constitutional monarchy. You would think that they wouldn't be such great friends, but actually they are. And as a matter of fact, the princess speaks Mandarin and travels to China all the time, meets Chinese President Xi Jinping, got an award from him, and they're very close together. So people need to look at reality. What is actually happening versus these stereotypes and these assumptions based on analysis by ideology or analysis by analogy. These are very bad ways to look at the world. We have to actually look at the facts, follow the money, look at the numbers, and see where things actually exist.
Yeah. And I think, when it comes to this question of why don't you move there, it's a complete detachment from the political, geopolitical substance, right? It's because you don't like what we say, then it automatically means that, and it's a leftover of McCarthyism, because it automatically means you need to be ejected, and that was a very popular
Yes.
framework and idea, especially during the McCarthy period, was if you don't toe the line on U.S. foreign policy toward the Soviet Union, China, so-called communist states, then if you don't want war with those countries and you don't support war against any country, because it wasn't just communist-led countries the U.S. was waging war with during that period, then you are a traitor, you're treasonous, and you need to be deported. Some people actually did get deported. And so that's, to me, where that framework, that idea comes from, that like response, you got to go because and I'm sure a lot of people can relate in the audience here because it is a very common response. I probably get that comment on videos every day.
Well, also, Danny, I've been to China and it's amazing. And I think what a part of that comment is implying that, oh, China is a hellhole. I saw some video from the 1960s, and I just imagine it's still like that. Like they're all on bicycles and living in in their own, they're all reclining, doing opium. But it's not like that at all. As a matter of fact, when I was in China, this was in 2007. Already at that point, everything was cleaner, better organized, more functional, more efficient than in what I was doing. Was I had traveled across the entire U.S. and I traveled almost entirely across China. And again, the difference is night and day. As a matter of fact, Danny, I think you're preparing for a trip to
Friday.
China, so it's going to be interesting to see what your take is, because you're actually going. So why don't you go there, Danny? So Danny's going to China.
Yeah. Second time, actually. I'm very excited. Second time in 4 years, I guess, since we're almost headed to the 4-year point when I visited the first time in December 2019. And this time around, unlike then, I was not really I wrote a couple articles and I did have some footage, but I really wasn't doing video. But this time around, I'm going to have, very modest vlogging equipment, but it's good enough. I used it in Europe, and so it's good enough to use. And so I definitely will be showing life there and hopefully being some kind, active in that way to some extent. But yeah, when I was first there, I had a very similar reaction because no matter how much I didn't necessarily believe in the propaganda, if you hear it enough, it's just there in your mind. You might not be looking to confirm it, but you might be reacting to it as you're interacting with this environment. And that was my reaction, was, wow, this is very clean, very organized. People are living a lot better, and most people and
safer.
Safer. And if you just, listen to what both the government and what a lot of people say is, wow, I couldn't imagine living like this. My parents, my grandparents, they couldn't live like this. You can meet people in the United States who are Chinese who talk like that, where they talk about, it was just 30 years ago, 40 years ago, where we were just in the countryside living without running water. And, it wasn't that long ago that China was extremely poor. I mean, extreme poverty was just eradicated a few years ago. So when I was there, you could see the fruits of that. You can see the improvement, the progress. And also just the mentality is just so much different. There is no thirst for war there. Actually, all the people that I would speak to would say, why is your government so crazy? Like, why do they like guns so much? And why do they want to come to war with us? Because we just have no interest in that. And so that's like the most apolitical person there. That's how they talk. They're like, we don't want that. So that's crazy.
And they don't. They don't hate Americans. People here in Thailand that understand what the U.S. is doing to Thailand. This is a very sensitive issue for them. And yet they don't hate Americans. They don't hate America. They know that it's the government. They know that it's special interests. And the other thing I was going to say was, people who think China, the Communist Party of China is communist. Look at that red flag. that you go there and people are living their lives and doing business, owning property, just like everywhere else on Earth. And I'm sure, there's obviously an emphasis on state-owned enterprises and the government having the final say and everything. But the way they're doing business there is not entirely unlike everywhere else in the world. You would have to explain to me what you even mean by communist, because when you go there, so that's another reason people should go there and look, or at least go on YouTube and check out those 4K walking or driving videos. And look, they've got stores where you can buy stuff with money. I mean, and people with their own businesses, right? I mean, I don't know what their definition of communism is. So it's like this infection in their brain that I think straddles both racism and just an irrational, ignorant understanding of whatever capitalism and communism is, this argument that they ideologically have versus how countries actually work in the real world.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting about China, I'm really excited to see how it's changed, because it's always changing. But one of the most interesting things that I noticed was, well, on the one hand, yeah, you do have the big state-owned enterprises, especially the financial institutions. They dominate very intentionally, because we were told when we were there that if you don't control your financial system, then you're bound to be looted. That's basically how it was framed. It's like if your government doesn't control that, then companies are just going to loot it. And it was a direct reference to how it works in the United States, where people get really, really, really rich, a very tiny few people off the financial system, and the money supply is directed not in the interest of the country. So, but with that said, when I was there, it's like you have of course, the state-owned companies, you have them in tech, you have them in all the big sectors, and you also have the foreign investment that you see in some respects. I would say it's a lot. Depending on where you go, I'm going to be in Shanghai this time at some point. I know it's a lot more prominent there, but where Beijing and everywhere else I went, Urumqi, it's not as intense. What you do see much more of, though, is private businesses that are Chinese. They're just Chinese private businesses. And one of the things that people will tell you is that because their money supply, their financial system is in the control of the government, that means that it's much easier to conduct business in China, because you do not have to rely on predatory banks to loan you money. Like, you can, if you have a viable idea, if it's worth it, if you're able, yeah, you can start a business, and the government will be heavily regulated. Government institutions will be heavily regulated to help you do that. So that's what I noticed, is like all across the city in Beijing, it's just a bunch of private businesses, and they all look like they're able to survive, likely because of government support. And that seems like a strange notion now, I think, in the U.S. and the collective West, when their governments are literally just funneling money to weapons, to big banks, and investment. I mean, they're about to do an investment ban on China. Investment is just not, it's not really the priority.
Well, also, it's hard for people in the West, I think, especially Americans, to imagine the government actually investing in the people. That's an alien concept to them. That's something that some people say, oh, it shouldn't, because they're ultra capitalist or libertarians and they don't want any government at all, which I think is kind of unrealistic. But there's also people that wish that the government did, but they just simply aren't doing it. I mean, look at the US, look at the infrastructure, look at the education system, just look at it. And then if you go to other countries, China is one of them, here in Thailand even, the government invests in the people. They invest in things that benefit the people, where there is profit involved, but the primary goal is a purpose for the people. Profit comes secondary. It's necessary. It comes secondary to creating this, whatever the organization is or whatever the infrastructure is, to serve the people and their ability to go about their daily business. And that's a sustainable way to run a country. You'll still make loads of money. You'll be prosperous. You might not be able to maximize your profits, but it's sustainable over the long term. And we can see in the US, when you obsess over profits only, it turns into a pyramid scheme, essentially. And then everything is destined to collapse eventually. You cannot sustain that. You cannot be taking away from the people, taking away from infrastructure, healthcare, education, and think that you can sustain a society like that. You simply cannot. The US actually used to be much more balanced in that respect. And this is something that has slid downhill. And as it has slid downhill, you can see that the country has followed. So there's a lot to think about. People should just, whatever it is, if it's something that you don't actually know anything about, China's on the other side of the planet for most people in the West, keep an open mind and look into it. Do your own research. You don't have to listen to me or Danny. Just do some of your own research and ask yourself if you're being objective, and are you keeping your mind open? Are you following the truth wherever it brings you, even if it contradicts some of your preconceived notions? Just do that. I'm sure that it might not live up to what we're saying, but it'll definitely challenge your perception of it right now. And it's important to do that, because that's how you drain the swamp of public support for the U.S. when it decides to pick another country and go to war with it. I'm guaranteeing you, the U.S. lied about Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Ukraine, Russia. This is not the first time they're telling the truth. They are also lying about China. They're lying about China more than anywhere else because the stakes for the U.S. are so high. This is the one country that can and is going to surpass the United States. So they have every motivation to lie about China.
Yeah, indeed. And maybe we can close our conversation with, well, what about the social credit system? Because I often get that comment too. And I know you've done a lot of analysis on that, because usually it's like, we make these points about, well, I mean, China's not perfect. China still has problems. Hell, I'm about to go to China. I have WeChat and I really want to use WeChat Pay, but I can't because you need a Chinese bank account. And I get there are probably reasons for that. But it's a little frustrating because I'm going to go there and everyone uses WeChat Pay. I'm probably going to get in a cab sometime and they're going to look at me like I have two heads because I'm not using my phone to pay for the ride. But anyway, with that said, of course, China isn't perfect. China still has problems and it seems committed to resolving them the best that they can. And it's not the U.S.'s business to interfere. But in any event, like, this social credit system always comes up. It's always like this thing of like, this is the thing that will prove that China actually is bad. So what's your take?
People need to read the articles in the Western media about the so-called social credit system very carefully, because even in the Western media, they will admit, buried deep in the body of the article, that it doesn't exist, that they have private companies that have certain like point systems, which you have it. I don't know. It's a coffee shop. You get 10 coffees, you get one free, and they have a system to keep track of it. But that's just for the coffee thing. You don't actually have to be in that. You could go to another place that doesn't have that. And it's the same in China. If you're on the train, you ride the train all the time, and you're sitting in other people's seats. You're smoking someplace where you're not supposed to. You're creating some kind of problem. They're going to keep track of that. And if you continuously do it, you're not going to be allowed on the train, which is the way it has always worked everywhere, except recently in the West, where the police are not on the police don't go on the trains. There is no measures. There are rules that are just ignored, and there's penalties that are not enforced, and it makes it unbearable to use public transportation. So they don't do that in China. They don't do that in a lot of countries. They have rules, they have regulations, they enforce it, and there's penalties for breaking these rules and regulations. It is not a universal social credit system. There is no such thing, does not exist. Get a Chinese friend or get a couple of Chinese friends, people who are proud to be Chinese, proud of what their country has achieved, not these malcontents who leave China and hate China, and they say bad things about China so they could fit in with the cool crowd in the West. Find some Chinese friends who actually are proud of their country and listen to them. Listen to their point of view. Listen to what they have to say about daily life in China.
Yeah, indeed. It's, China is for the Chinese. I mean, they are the ones who will determine what is positive, what is negative about their development path. And It's so funny because I remember this Business Insider article that you covered. I've covered it here, talking about the social credit system, where they literally admit it doesn't actually exist in the way that is being thought of, and that any kind of rollout of a social credit system where behavior is then marked with rewards is by private companies. And actually, what's funny about this is I've seen coverage of this rollout of this like experiment for private companies to like reward consumers based on their various behavior, usually consumption behavior and the financial behaviors, that young people actually really like it, because if they like do things like save money and do things that are pretty basic, and it's like not break the law, not break traffic laws, that kind of thing, then they like get free stuff. It's like
Yeah.
they get discounts on things, and it's just it's not so, I guess it doesn't have the teeth that it often is presented as having.
You know what they
the corporate
imagine.
media.
You know what they imagine it as is they have cameras in your house, and if you don't salute your picture of President Xi Jinping, then like a police car is waiting for you outside. That's what they imagine it to be, and it's nothing even close to that. And what it actually is very similar to a lot of systems in the West. There's point. I don't know about if it's everywhere, but there are point systems when you're driving. If you lose X number of points, you lose your license. There are things like that in China, and it's a huge country. It's the largest population in the world, or India is, I think they're like neck to neck now, but they had got a lot of people. It's the same population as the U.S. with 1.1 billion extra people. That's a lot of people. So they use technology to keep track of everything, and it works, and people are happy with it. And again, when I debunked the social credit system claim, I used only Western media sources to do it. I went into their articles and I showed you the subsequent paragraphs buried in the article that admit that everything in the headline is misleading, if not an outright lie. And when you actually read about the system, it makes a lot of sense, how it's actually working and what it actually is, versus what they try to make you think is this all-seeing eye, and nothing you do goes unnoticed and unpunished.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.